everyone, welcome to another Patreon voted review. This month's selection is Recca. Shout outs to the patrons for keeping the channel going. And today I have a special treat for you all, a special surprise. Joining me for today's review is the one, the only, Shmup Junkie. Welcome to the channel, my dude.
Surprise! It's good to be here, Mark. It's good to talk to you. I always like doing podcasts with you and just chatting. So it's always a good time.
So let's get a little bit into the history of this game because I found it absolutely fascinating. So this was developed in 1992. So we aren't quite in the Battle Garega Bullet Hell era yet. This is pre-Battle Garega. This is pre-Bullet Hell. But already, you know, you're seeing that within Yagawa's design. I watched the credits rolled by and I was amused at how tiny the staff of this game was. It's like Yagawa, two other dudes, Recca, you know, it's like the staff for the game is absolutely tiny. So basically Yagawa made it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that unusual for that time either. A lot of those smaller games had a very small development staff. You know, a lot of Toaplan games had a very small development staff. You had like one or two people that did the whole thing. So yeah, it's not uncommon.
Super impressive, though, to think. I was thinking about this today as I was sitting down and contemplating the review, how insane these old school Japanese devs were, that they were cranking out these games like one after another almost every single year with these tiny staff on these, I'm sure, old school development hardware that probably wasn't super easy to work with. So these dudes were probably putting in 10 hours a day or something, knowing the Japanese work ethic and all.
Oh, 10 would be probably an understatement. I mean, they worked a lot. I mean,
they just
10. I mean, I wish my days were only 10 hours. So I'm sure these guys are putting in like 16-hour days, easy, 14 to 16, and barely sleeping or going out to drink and then coming back and working more. So that was kind of common.
So they made Recca for Summer Carnival. At least that's what everyone says. So if you look at reviews, if you look at Wikipedia entries, everything says Recca was made for Summer Carnival. But I was going through and kind of looking through the list of Summer Carnival games of the era, and all I saw was 93 was Nexer, 92 was Recca, also 92 was Alzadik. I'm not sure how you're supposed to say that. How do you say that, Junkie?
That's exactly how you say that.
Alzadik.
It's an unfortunate name, but it is what it is.
And then 1991, Spriggan, which we actually covered together in the other video, so check out the Spriggan video. And so I was like, wait a minute here. All of these games are just from this publisher, so is it true that they're making them for this event, or is it more likely the reverse? They're making the event for the games to show off their games, and that's what I suspect probably happened.
They're kind of a competitor to Hudson, because Hudson Software, the original, they're the ones that ran the carnivals. They wouldn't call them carnivals. They just called it the caravans. Naxet called it the Summer Carnival. So
yes,
Hudson was doing that back from the Famicom days with, Star Soldier and Star Force and all of their games and Hector 87. And then once the, 16-bit system started coming out, then Hudson started doing it with Gunhead and the Soldier games. So Naxat came in, they're like, well, we're going to do a series too. So the Summer Carnival is Naxat's caravan series specifically. I guess you can call it a competitor or, a friendly competition or, whatever you want to call it.
Yes, it's kind of like when Ketsui Destiny came out and they had the scoring competition for Ketsui, or I don't know if they did one for Battle Garega. I believe they did. And then sometimes indie games will come out with little competitions for them. But I just thought it was funny that they marketed this competition so well that it's almost the competition got more press than the actual game, it seems like. So shout outs to the marketing team on that one.
Hudson had the most popular, they were the most well known. Naxat kind of came in a little bit later, but they had some really good games, as part of their Summer Carnival too. So
the developer behind this is Shinobu Yagawa of Battle Garega fame. He went on to be, I would consider, one of the most influential shmup designers of all time. He's definitely up in that pantheon. And what's really cool about Recca is this looks like it was his first shmup where he was the lead, and it's interesting how many elements of classic Yagawa design are already in Recca. This dude had these ideas way back in 1992. So I thought it'd be interesting to go over some of these Yagawa-isms in the game. But before we get into the gameplay, I want to know, and I hope you have expertise on this, why the Nintendo? Why the Famicom? It seems like such an odd fit for this game.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, the Famicom and NES was very shmup oriented. I mean, they actually, if you look at the total count of how many shooters the Famicom had, it's probably close to or over 100 as well. They had a lot.
That's
I
true,
can't say they
yeah.
were all great,
No.
but there was a lot of them. I wouldn't be surprised if he did it because he wanted to prove something. I mean, I don't know that because I've never read any interviews. You know, maybe
But
he was
Yagawa's
just
like
more.
that. He is like that,
Yeah, I
though.
mean, maybe he wanted to prove what he can do because it was kind of the same way with the Power Strike games and Power Strike 2 and Compile on the Sega Master System, where, you know, in 1993, they decided to make a Master System game, you know, that ended up being like the technical showpiece of the Master System when it came to shooters. Basically said, look what we can do on this system now, because they knew the hardware so well.
Mhm.
And 92 was kind of toward the end of the NES and Famicom years.
Hell yeah.
So it was the same thing. It's like, well, look what we can do with the hardware now. It's almost like showing off, because it's something you don't see anymore, and it ended up being a technical showcase. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but that would be my only guess, aside from them just being more comfortable on that hardware.
I bring that up because in 1991, in the 2 years before Summer Carnival, they put Spriggan on the TurboGrafx CD, and then they did Alzadik on the TurboGrafx CD, and then they did Nexer Special the next year on the TurboGrafx CD. So they're all TurboGrafx CD games, but Recca sticking in the middle, 1992, Nintendo. So
Yeah, well, it's also very unusual to have two games the same year. So it almost gives me the impression that, you know, they had Alzadik planned, and then Recca just kind of happened. You know, maybe Yagawa wanted to make a game. Maybe there's just some kind of a deal that worked out. Because I said, just having two games is unusual in and of itself.
yeah, true.
So it could just be that it was a unique situation where they had the opportunity to make it, or they had, you know, this company that wanted to make it, and they liked him and they saw the potential and they just took it on. I mean, I don't know why they did it.
What are the limitations are we talking here? We're saying it's pushing the limitations, it's breaking limitations. What are the limitations of this thing? Because I'm not super familiar with what the NES can do and what it can't do.
Well, I think there's no real limitations to any system. It obviously has to do with the developer, because there's been a lot of NES games that were really impressive and pushed the hardware. You know, Recca's not the only one. Recca's definitely the one that pushed the hardware in terms of shooters are concerned, beyond what, you know, any other NES game had done. And you see that a lot with other systems too. I mean, I don't know what the limits are, but I do know that he obviously exceeded them one way or another. And I don't know how he did that. Maybe that's like we talked about earlier. Maybe that's why he wanted to make it on the NES.
Yeah. Is the flickering a way to save memory or RAM or whatever it is? By having it flicker, is that sort of freeing up processor for processing?
Yeah, well, I don't think
slowdown?
it's not that they choose to make it flicker. It's not something they program. Like, they don't program it to flicker. It's something that happens, you know, by default, because you're exceeding the limitations of the system.
Oh, okay. So,
but
okay,
they're programming it in such a way where it's not going to have slowdown. You know, I don't, like I said, I'm not a programmer on Famicom, so I have no idea how they go about it.
right.
But it was the same thing on PC Engine. Like, you didn't see that very much on Mega Drive and Super
Right.
Nintendo games.
No.
And I don't know if it was unique to like that architecture and the, you know, the hardware. But whatever the case, you saw it a lot more in PC Engine games too, where they would flicker versus slow down. Yeah, I mean, it's really the speed, I think, that impressed everybody at the time, is because,
It is
you know,
cooking, yeah.
games just did not play that fast at the time. It was impossible, you know, on the Famicom, especially the later stage where like you're moving backwards and it's so fast. I mean, you can practically can't even record it properly unless you're recording at 60 frames, because it's just moving so fast and the background is moving so fast. It's like mind-boggling that they pulled that off on the Famicom. You don't even really see that on 16-bit systems. You know, they don't scroll the background that quickly.
Now let's go over the gameplay of Recca, how this works for people who've never played it before and want to get a sort of familiarity, because this is Yagawa in its infancy, but already there's a lot of elements that definitely stand out. So you have two power-up systems, and they drop power-up items, and then the power-up items rotate their value as they come down. That's pretty Yagawa-like. So the first power-up, I guess you'd call it your main shot, and it has all these different subversions. And then the second one, they're like your little options, your sub shot, and they come down. And you usually want to try and match them up. I believe you want to keep matching the same ones to maximize your scoring. That's what it looked like. Am I on track there?
Scoring wise, I'm not an expert in the game, but as far as powering up your weapon, that's kind of the case. You know, you need to pick up the same units to kind of, you know, power it up to the next level.
What power up did you end up using the most?
Honestly, it kind of varied. It depended on the stage and depended where on the stage. Because I think part of what Yagawa was doing and the reason they give you so many power-ups is different waves of enemies and different sections of levels are ideally played with different weapons. And they're always throwing them down at you.
Yeah.
With bosses, it's usually about using your bomb correctly, which I'm sure you'll probably talk about later.
Yes.
We'll bosses are meant to.
Don't give it away.
Yeah.
Yes,
so we'll talk about that later. But so for bosses, you're not really using any of your weapons all that much if you're playing it correctly. But for the levels, like I said, it has to do with what type of enemy waves are coming down. Sometimes the Vulcan is just the most efficient. Sometimes the laser works way better than anything else because it does more damage, and the Vulcan just can't kill like the beefier enemies fast enough.
Yeah,
and just the screen floods with too many enemies, and you get overwhelmed. So it's kind of like that with caravan games, where you're memorizing and routing the levels, and you're supposed to, in this particular case, know what the best item is and the best weapon is for that particular level and area, because they're throwing so many at you. It's so easy and quick to change it up. So you're constantly in a position where you can change your weapon to something else when you need to.
Yeah, and I'd be real surprised if some of those sub-weapons just seemed kind of crappy. Like Rotate seemed just kind of crappy.
It's one of those things where I agree with you. I don't think they're all, equal. I mean, they have their uses, but like the Seeking is definitely one of the best ones. And I said, I'm not an expert on Recca because I haven't played it a ton. But I always felt like that the secondary weapons were not an afterthought, but they weren't as critical as your main weapon or the bomb.
Yes.
It's one of those things where kind of it helps your firepower. Maybe on hard or like the crazier settings it is, and you have to be an expert with everything. But like on the normal mode, you can kind of get away with, most of the secondary weapons as long as you've got the right primary weapon selected and you're powered up and you're using your bombs correctly.
I think they're mostly good for crowd control in the main stages, like you were saying, where you've got all these things flying around. Seeking will hit stuff flying from the sides. Or sometimes they're useful for if you need to just kind of cheese out on the side of the screen, and Seeking can shoot things as they come up so you don't get rammed from the back and stuff. So what did you think about the rotating power-ups?
I mean, I think that's part of the point is, it makes it so you can pick up any weapon that you need at any particular time. It's not put there to confuse you or to make it more difficult. It's put there to kind of overwhelm you with weapon choices and pretty much allow you to switch on the fly. When you watch people play who are like very, very good, and if they're doing some of the, score and time attack modes, they're not just like picking a weapon and sticking to it all the time. They're always like changing and changing and changing, especially because it's involved with score too. So they'll let it change and they'll pick up a different one. They'll pick up the right one. And like, I can see them cycling through different shot types. Each shot type that they're picking is more effective for the area that they're in. And then as soon as they don't need it anymore, here comes the next one. It's scrolling down. It changes to what you need. You pick it up.
Yagawa got right really early on, as we see here in Recca, is he figured out how to do item drops correctly in shmups that took the rest of the developers of shmups, like the Raiden team and all these people, forever to figure out, if they ever did figure out, which is rather than having your stupid power-up bounce around the screen randomly and you have to chase it into enemy fire, Yagawa always has them drop directly downward, so that you can route around them, you can plan when you pick them up. They become much more strategic that way, and he did these with the medals, of course, in Recca. And there's also medal items in this game. Real focus of your routing is planning out the stupid power-up drops.
It certainly gives you more than you need. If you die, it's one of the rare games at that time where it's not long before you have a power-up in your face, to get what you need.
Recovery in this game can be tough a little bit because of just how brutal the stages are. But design-wise, I do think recovery is much fairer than most of the stuff you see during this era. By far, yeah. And, of course, Yagawa also levels the playing field with a very interesting mechanic that he will not give up on. You'll see it throughout most of his games, which is this charging bomb mechanic, where if you don't shoot, you start to grow this bomb in front of you, and it will actually absorb some enemy fire, and you can use it defensively. And then you drop it and it absolutely nukes bosses and nukes enemies. And so what's really great about this mechanic is not only is it fun, but it really helps you get out of that Gradius syndrome where, let's say you take a death right before coming into a big boss fight. It's not game over because you still have the bomb.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people that play it correctly, when you watch them play, they're using the bomb a lot. It's meant to be used constantly throughout the game. And, they actually don't fire all that often. They use the bomb a lot. And I mean, it's also because it's built into the scoring. Just having the bomb charged and absorbing bullets basically racks up your score like crazy.
Yeah.
So it's not just
Very
about
Pink
killing
Sweets
enemies;
like.
it's about having that. So
Yeah, it's incredibly Pink Sweets like. It reminds me. So I could see Pink Sweets players really connecting with this game for a lot of reasons. One of them being that bomb mechanic.
oh yeah, as soon as I saw Pink Sweets, because I didn't know about it till obviously much later, and I saw them like, oh, that's Recca.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Another thing about this game that sets it apart from its Yagawa brethren, though, is the lack of rank. So even though you've got power-ups, medals, sub-weapon switching, bombs, all the things that make a Yagawa game, the crazy rank system does not exist. So if you don't like rank systems in your shmups, but you want Yagawa-style game, I think Recca is going to be right up your alley.
Well, I mean, there's almost nowhere for the rank to go. I mean, it already starts up like cranked. I mean, it's basically
Yeah.
super hard all the time. So it's like having the rank all the way up from the beginning.
That's right. That's a really good point, actually. Yeah. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the difficulty, because this was a very contentious point in the game's critical history, where every single review up till very recently, they all said, oh yeah, the design's great, it's really cool what it's doing with the hardware, but it's too difficult. So what did you think on the difficulty as far as comparing it to other Caravan shmups and also in your own sort of taste?
There's two different aspects to it. Compared to other Caravan shmups, it's like a polar opposite. It's like completely different, and I can explain that part of it. It's that initial impression it gives you of being impossible. And, a lot of these people that are reviewing the games only put so much time into it. So, it's impossible, and that's how it ends for them. So it's just too hard. But it's very learnable. If you're going to play for survival, getting the 1cc on the normal mode,
right,
it's very learnable, but you have to learn to play it properly. You have to learn how to use the bomb. You have to learn how to cycle through the weapons and not get overwhelmed by enemies. But it's definitely not as impossible as like a lot of the reviews make it sound.
Yeah.
Once you really get into it, so it just seems impossible, and that's why you get all those reviews saying, oh, this game's way too hard. But as far as its comparison to other Caravans, it's a complete polar opposite, because the whole idea behind the Caravan games, especially the Hudson games, was it was a great entry point for kids. So if you look at those old videos of like the Hudson Caravans, you'll see it's mostly kids, children. Sometimes even
really? Wow.
Yeah, even really young kids. So, you look at these videos and you've got parents with their kids, they're like standing behind them while they're playing. They wanted to get the young generation into playing these games, and they wanted to make it accessible for everybody. It's very, very easy to complete the Caravan modes. They're not difficult. I mean, even someone who sucks at shmups can pick up the Soldier Blade 2-minute mode and survive till the end. Survival is easy. It's not the point. So you can have someone very young, like kids, just pick it up and really enjoy it and finish the mode. They're not going to score well. They're just going to finish it. But to score really high, to get like an elite score in one of those modes is extremely difficult and takes just as much time and practice as anything else. So there's this dichotomy going on where they wanted anybody to be able to play it, so they made it easy, not hard. But then they made it extremely difficult to route perfectly and get an elite score and compete. Where Recca, Yagawa came in and said, no, I'm making this for experts. This is only for elite players. Like you can't, there's no kids that are going to pick up this game and play it. Recca is completely opposite. There's no ground-based targets. There's no bonuses. It's all based on enemy waves. It's all about the mechanics, and it's all about expert play. So it is very, very different than every single other Caravan mode.
I'm becoming more and more fond of the idea of shmups taking that first stage and throwing it in the garbage, because it's like, yeah, it's fine to have that little baby first stage the first time you play, maybe the second time you play, but the 15th time you play, the 20th time you play, the 100th time you play, do you really want to sit through basically a baby stage 200 times? That's what I did appreciate about Recca, is it felt like you're saying ultra compact. It felt like we're shoving everything in. And from what I understand, the sales of poor Recca, even though it was on the Famicom, weren't exactly killing it. And so these days, the cart, hella expensive.
I'm glad I got mine when I did quite a while ago. I wouldn't be buying it now.
That's what I was going to ask you. So you got your hands on one of these bad boys. How did that happen?
I just got a really good deal. It's one of those things where you're on the right forums. I don't remember if it was a Facebook group or something else, or I came across someone that was selling it. It's a private party, and it's a good deal because it's not like crazy overpriced like the eBay stuff.
Yes.
It's one that I wanted to have, and so I just jumped on it because I was collecting all the different Caravan games from the time, and I just it was an Axat Summer Carnival game, and I wanted it.
What did you think about the music and the graphics? Did this stand out to you graphically or musically, or was this sort of run-of-the-mill?
The thing that stands out to me the most isn't as much the graphics, it's the speed of the game, which I think I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Because, the graphics are good, but there's lots of, late NES games that have, really phenomenal graphics. But they're more typical games, they can pull them off. Here, the graphics had to be simplified because the game runs so incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And there's so many bullets, so it's not so much the graphics themselves, it's the technical achievement of how much is going on screen and how fast it's going and how little slowdown there is.
Yeah.
I think the effects are really cool. The speed of the scrolling, and there's like the level with like the cool purple like wave effect and everything else. Like, they pull off some really cool things going on. And the music, like I said, is like you said earlier, is just crazy. From a compositional standpoint, like the most amazing thing in the world, I think it's just very cool. Like it's techno club music like of the like early 90s.
Yes, yeah.
But they somehow managed to like squeeze into a NES and make it work. I don't prefer it over like the cool Star Soldier tunes or something like that, but it's just so technically impressive because you just never heard anything like that on the Famicom before. I never had.
It felt very frantic to me. Like they're trying to keep up with the gameplay, so they're just cranking the music and making the music as energetic.
Oh, it definitely
as
matches the speed of the game. That's
for sure. Yeah.
It's like you down a couple of Red Bulls, you pick up the controller, and you're ready to go. It's almost like designed for that.
So what would you say is Recca's biggest strength?
To be honest with you, I think I agree with you. The Recca's biggest strength is just its mechanics. It's no nonsense. There's some things it does well, and there's some things it doesn't do well. Like, there's weaknesses too. If you're one of those players that wants to pick up a game specifically for the challenge and specifically for the mechanics, Yagawa had it down. As far
Visionary.
As just being able to pick it up and learn to route the game. Like there's nothing that I came across that just pisses you off as unfair. The game is incredibly hard, but it's designed well.
Yes.
And when you die because it's your fault or because you suck because you got overwhelmed, but you always feel like you could play better or there was a solution. Like there's nothing janky about it except for, the sprite flicker, obviously, and the technical side of it.
Yeah, I would agree there, absolutely. And I think, again, it's really impressive how much Yagawa-isms already appear in Recca. Coming out of nowhere with all this stuff, it's really impressive what he came up with. And I did like how he jacked up the enemy count so much. I thought that was really cool, too. Because it feels that, like, when you first fire up the game, it feels like it's Galaga gone to hell. Like, it's thousands of just enemies flying in at you like Galaga or something, but I really love the higher enemy counts as well, like, and how crazy the screen scrolling is. You're going forwards, you're going backwards. It's Sonic the Hedgehog speeds. Yeah, this guy was really just Yagawa is Yagawa. So I agree. The biggest strength is just how ahead of its time it was with a lot of these mechanics. So what would you say is its biggest weakness? So you have to change it. You can't keep it the same because it's an arrange. So you have to change something.
Sure. For me, just a technical experience, versus like a lot of the other games, which they feel more like a game, like you're actually playing a game. So like I said, the strength of like the other Caravan games, like the Soldier games and, the Hudson games, is if you play the game as a game, there's more to it than just the mechanics. The graphics are obviously going to be a little bit more impressive.
Yeah.
It's not just the same thing over and over again. So like when you're playing a typical game, you'll have more variety in enemy types. You'll have, bosses distributed a little bit differently. When you're jumping into Recca, it feels like you're playing a competition, which is what it is.
Definitely.
So it's kind of like, if I was going to make an arrange mode, the game's already got the competitive side down. I'm not going to start changing it up and adding more mechanics and making it even harder. If anything, it's just not accessible to anybody else.
Yeah. And actually, that's very close to what I would say. So my biggest two weaknesses or things that I would change. The first is kind of a minor one, but I think he should go in there, or should have gone in there and like recolored some things a little bit, because sometimes the bullets blend into the background a little too much on top of flickering. So it's like Virtual Boy or something. Like There's a lot of pinks and reds going on. Like he could have, changed the color palette up, I think, a little bit. More elements of the game stand out color-wise. And then another thing that I would do, and this is basically really alongside your point, is it was cool to have like a boss rush on stage 4, but at the same time, it felt a little anticlimactic. So I think if he could have got 2 more stages in there and got at least to stage 5 or so, or I guess it'd be stage 6, that's the boss rush. I think that would have, like you said, make it feel more like a finished game rather than like, we need to get this out for the competition tomorrow. So it felt like he was programming it, and then someone sent him an email. It's like, bro, you got a week left. He's like, okay, boss rush, That's what it kind of felt like. Because it did feel like a sudden jar off the sort of natural level progression. So I think if you could have got those last 2 stages in there, it would have really helped. To me, this felt like one of the best shmups on the NES that I've played. Does that sound like an accurate assessment to you, or is there some hidden beasts on the NES that would give it a run for its money?
I think it has to do with what you consider a good shmup or what you're looking for.
That's
so I mean,
true.
from a technical standpoint and mechanically, yes, it's one of the best. I mean, as far as the innovation, how it plays, the performance. If you're looking for like a quick 15 to 20 minute rush, I mean, this is about as good as it gets. But if you're looking at it overall, kind of like, what shmups are like the most memorable for me, like nostalgia-wise, that I come back to over and over, I think it's more the traditional kind of experiences, like I'm going to come back and play, Salamander or Life Force, and I'm going to come back and play, some of these Konami games.
Is the NES like the Konami machine as far as like excellent shmups like Gradius, Life Force, Salamander, or
not just Konami, Capcom too. Konami, Capcom.
Oh, like the 1943 games? Is that? It's like a giant black hole in my knowledge of NES shmups. I have no idea what's on the damn thing, other than Recca.
There were some exclusive
Gradius.
ones they made. I mean, there was Crisis Wing by I think it was Konami also. Wait, not Crisis Wing. What the hell am I saying? Crisis Force.
There you go.
Crisis Force is where I'm like, Crisis Wing. No, it's not Crisis Wing. Crisis Wing is a new game.
Crisis Wing's a hospital sim, man.
but it was taken on Crisis. It was a take on Crisis Force. Really technically impressive. Like the NES has some technically impressive games, but it's not so much about being impressive. It's more about kind of like being that complete experience where, it's got 6 or 7 levels. There's more variety in the backgrounds. Yeah. It's meant to be a game. It's not meant to be, like I said, a competition. Because that's really what Recca is just a set of competitive modes.
Yes.
That you can just pick up and play and kick ass.
Yeah.
So it's definitely up there. I think most people would consider it one of the best shooters on the system just because of what it is.
It feels very arcade-like too. I think he missed the memo where it was coming out on home console. He's like he's thinking in his head, I'm putting this in an arcade machine because it really feels like an arcade game. I don't know. I could see like the battle in the comments section, the Yagawa boys versus the Konami boys fighting it out. I think you're right. I don't think it's like a clear winner where it's just like obvious everyone votes. Yeah, Recca wins. But if it's up your alley, it's going to be hard to find something to replace it. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining today's episode. I know the patrons are going to absolutely love it. The fans are going to love it. I'm going to get constant requests to have you in every video. I'm sure. Thanks so much, my dude.
Yeah, thank you. It was fun chatting and talking and BS. And, now like I want to go back and play Recca some more because I haven't really thought about it in so long.
Got it in your blood. Tune in for when Shmup Junkie does his Mega Drive Genesis video because that's an insane undertaking and it's definitely worth your time.
Yeah, it's going to be a few weeks, but I'm working through it.
So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100, Dingo, Another Joe, Anthony A, Anthony Iodice, Aaron Solis, Asa Davis, Bo, Ben, Borgie22, Brian Shiver, Chris Yusufovich, Chris Perry, Buy Me Coyote, Cook Some Soup, Corey Mark, Des Ardio, Dark Wing, Darren Griffin, Delta Tango 6, Disco Stas Leia, DJ 420, Praise It, Eric H, FCK Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Kiwi, JLab, JB RPG, Jim Knockham, John Kelly, Joltz, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, Kikoman 589, Corbin, Larridge, Malaise, Mark Toms, Mataroso, Matthew Derrigis, Maz, Megadeth 859, Minung, Michaelin, Michael Stum, Mitchell Y, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Ogle Googles, Philip Mason, Redocat, Raul, Rilskeen, Riff Mason, Rolf015, Scanline City, 7 Overdose, Shmup Junkie, Silas, Space Fotis, Stadium Arts, Steve Fiction, The Boot Rex, The Real Ikuzo, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Bensta, TRM, Zugumo, Twilight EX, Wabby Legs, X20 Spect, Plasmo, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.